In today's video, I begin my journey through the Tribunal DLC featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Tribunal was released in late 2002 and was the first expansion for Morrowind. Since beginning my first ever playthrough for this game, I've already become fairly acquainted with how this DLC begins. In fact, the DLC's introduction has become a bit of a sore spot for players. It happens abruptly, often getting the jump on new and unsuspecting players, and it acts as a bit of a workaround for receiving decent armor and copious amounts of gold right off the bat. My personal experience was such, as when it first happened, I was completely clueless and bewildered that an occurrence like that would happen to a player who's literally just started the game. Without further ado, it's time to delve into the Tribunal DLC and its beginning. As soon as the Tribunal expansion is installed, the start of it can be triggered at any point. The player may find themselves needing to rest or sleep after a lengthy adventure or battle. Doing so, there's a chance you'll be interrupted by a creature of some sort, which is usually no issue. However, with the Tribunal installed, there's also a chance that a random assassin will spawn and start attacking you. Lower level players are likely to have more difficulty defeating them. They usually fight with a sword of some kind and occasionally use ranged attacks. The higher your level, the tougher the encounters will start to get. The first few times I fought them as a lowly mage, I was defeated fairly quickly each time, and they were certainly not a force I wanted to reckon with. However, at higher levels, they serve as an unexpected cash cow and nuisance, occasionally still putting up a decent fight. Once you manage to finally best one of the assassins, you get access into their inventory. You learn that they are actually a member of the Dark Brotherhood, which doesn't really have a guild presence here on Vvardenfell. Their light armor set is far superior to most others that you'll come across throughout the game, as well as they can be sold for a decent chunk of change. Even after killing the first one, more assassins can be sent after you while you're attempting to sleep or rest. Hence the early gold exploit that a lot of veteran players find to be an unfortunate representation of the game for new players. Regardless, once the first assassin has been defeated, a journal entry is unlocked and suggests that the player goes and reports the attack to a guard. Approaching a legionnaire in Pelagiad, he immediately opened with dialogue regarding the assassination attempt. He confirms that it was likely the work of the Dark Brotherhood and expresses fear by saying to get away from him. In the end, he states that this does need to get reported and directs me over to Apelles Mattius in Ebonheart. Arriving at the Imperial outpost via boat, Apelles Mattius can be found on the ramparts of the fort. Speaking with him, he casts doubt on my story of being attacked by the Dark Brotherhood, as I'm currently here able to tell the tale. Inquiring further about the occurrence, he says that it's a very bad omen that I've been marked, and he doesn't want to find out by whom. He says that guild activity here on Vvardenfell is very rare, but back on the mainland of Morrowind, their numbers and contracts are steady. Asking further about the mainland, Apelles says that the faction operates out of Mournhold. He says I can feel free to check it out, although it'll likely be my death sentence. Even though the Blight and Dagoth have been eradicated, Mournhold is still weary with receiving visitors from Vvardenfell. Apelles then says that someone by the name of Ascian Rain might be able to help me with transportation over there. Inquiring about Rain, Apelles says that she could be found in the Grand Council chambers. Exiting the conversation and entering inside of the fort, I sought out Ascian Rain and spoke with her.
Oh, Outlander, did you want something?
Asking about transport to Mournhold, she reiterates that it's difficult to secure passage back there and is an irregular request. The mainland is still worried about Blight crossing over, and she asks me for my reason of wanting to head there. I can either divulge the information or tell her that it's none of her business. I choose the former, and she understands the urgency of the matter. She's weary about possibly sending me to my grave, but says that if it's what I really want, she can make it happen. In fact, she remarks that as soon as this conversation is over, I'll be teleported there right away. She gives me the name of the contact in the so-called Royal Palace who can send me back over to Vvardenfell. With that, I tell her goodbye and am immediately sent over to a completely foreign place. I see the Argonian she told me to speak with, as well as a royal guard. I take a look at the map and unfortunately, it still displays me being at Ebonheart, and I don't get to see a world view of the mainland. I wander to the upstairs region of this reception area and speak with a guard on patrol.
Justice never sleeps.
Asking him about the Dark Brotherhood, he says that he doesn't trust me and isn't comfortable talking about it. I increase his disposition to 40 and try again. This time, he says he's unsure why I would want to go looking for them, but remarks that others have said they live in the sewers beneath somewhere called the Great Bazaar. I ask about this spot, and he says it's on the eastern side of town. With that, thus ends the quest. Dark Brotherhood attacks. Returning back downstairs, I exited the reception area of the royal palace and ended up in the courtyard. This section was beautiful. It felt very calm and serene. The ambience was amazing and the foliage was like eye candy. One thing about Vvardenfell, which is obviously intentional, is that it feels like a dreary and gloomy place a lot of the time. It was refreshing to see a new upbeat version of this game. From the courtyard, I went through a great gate that led to a zone called Plaza Brindisi Dorum. This area was magnificent and so open. It had multiple gateways leading to other sections of the city, and right in the middle, there was a rather peculiar sculpture. Getting in closer, it depicts a battle between Almalexia and Mehrunes Dagon. I don't really know the lore there, but it was certainly a marvelous statue. Something really neat too about Mournhold is that the civilians and guards make different remarks at the player than what you'd hear back on Vvardenfell. Eventually, I found the gateway leading into the Great Bazaar and entered on through. The Great Bazaar contains several booths, establishments, and even a stage of some sorts. I knew that there likely had to be a lot of life and new quests that were one conversation away, so it was really hard to stay on task with searching for the sewer entrance. I stopped by a few merchants though in order to check out some of their wares and to get a lay of the land. Ungaleb at the magic shop had a handful of useful potions for sale, and I decided to indulge in a few. Eventually, I resumed my task and traced the sewer canals on the edge of the district, soon finding a hatch that led down into the bazaar sewers. The sewers were dimly lit, but rather open and spacious. Wandering in a bit, I began to come across some enemies, the first of which was a skeleton. Since completing the main quest line, I acquired the much needed boots of blinding speed, and ever since then, my experience playing this game has changed. My character is no longer annoyingly slow, and if anything, is almost too fast for my own good. Even whilst toggling no sprint, my character is still faster walking than he was while running before the boots were equipped. On the subject of walking, I made a second game-altering discovery that, while doing so, it has no effect on my fatigue. And in fact, my fatigue regenerates while I'm walking. I had actually already known that, but the fact that I was still fairly fast while moving felt kind of like a cheat code. So, not only was my movement speed still better than before, I, in theory, now never had to worry about my fatigue being depleted before a battle. That reminds me of another point I wanted to bring up for this playthrough of Morrowind. Magic has, for better or for worse, become a very secondary feature to my character, at least in terms of combat. Ever since I acquired the Daedric Spear and received the boots of blinding speed, it's become a lot easier to take down enemies with this skill, and it's been nice not needing to rest every time in between fights or needing to pop numerous potions. The Great Bazaar sewers themselves aren't very lengthy. There are multiple twists and meandering pathways, but ultimately, there are two different ways in which you can go that will lead you to the Manor District. The Manor District is where you start to get warmer in your search, as the enemies encountered here are Dark Brotherhood members. Right off the bat, I noticed that they have different ranks associated with them. Some are apprentices, others journeymen, and a few operators. My wandering brought me over to a lookout point with some stronghold entrances just beneath. I attracted the attention of more than a few assassins and was worried at first that I'd get overwhelmed. I was relieved to see though that we were separated by a narrow bridge and held them there as a choke point. Once all of them were defeated, I made a point to grab all of their lightest gear as I could carry a lot of it and could still be sold for a pretty penny. Making my way down to the bottom section, there were two entrances leading to two different strongholds. The first one I went into was the east building of Morrow Manor. Here, I fought a couple more assassins and explored the halls. This area wasn't very vast and both pathways led to dead ends. Exiting the east building, I then made my way inside of the north building. There continued to be assassins at every turn, but it really puts into perspective just how far my character has come from only being able to duel one at a time, and ultimately it being a toss-up to whether or not I survived. At one point, the fighting got pretty hairy, and I had to leave the building in order to rest up. This triggered my character to increase to level 17, and it was interesting putting more points into combat-focused attributes rather than magicka-focused ones. Entering back inside of the north building, I dealt with the remaining fighters and continued onwards. Just beyond an old metal door, an assassin with no helmet came running in at me. His weapon was rather unique too, and I figured that this had to be a leader of sorts. Plus, with every hit from my spear, his health was hardly going down. In fact, our first fight, he paralyzed and poisoned me, then drained my health completely with some powerful blows. The second attempt, I hit him with 2 casts of my second strongest frost spell and put some work in on him with the spear. I utilized the staggering and flinching it caused, as well as made sure to back up as much as possible in order to avoid paralysis. It only worked so long, however, as eventually he had me pinned to the spot with my health depleting rapidly. I counteracted it with some health potions, which, thankfully, helped me survive long enough in order to flee the building. Outside, I continued to heal up until I was finally ready to finish the job. With my magicka regenerated, I cast the frost spell on him, which managed to do the trick and finally kill him. As he was dying, Dandris Vulis yelled out, "No, tell my liege I have failed." The building now lay silent, and the answers I so desperately sought were lying right in front of me. Checking his inventory, I took the enchanted weapons, as well as a mysterious Dark Brotherhood contract. Reading it, it said, "The bearer of this document, under special dispensation of the Night Mother, who has entered in a contract in perpetuity with H, is given special dispensation to execute Bard, a Breton recently residing on the island of Vardenfell. In accordance with all laws and traditions, the aforementioned personage will be executed in the name of H in the most expedient manner possible. All services of the Dark Brotherhood are at the disposal of the bearer of this binding and non-disputable document." With the contract on my person, it was now time to return back to the overworld and learn more information. Who was this aforementioned H? What did they want with me, and why did they so urgently want me dead? Who was this liege that Dandris had failed? As a little side tangent, something I thought of while leaving this Dark Brotherhood base was that this game essentially makes you eradicate a whole sector of the guild. In Oblivion, it's sort of a big deal that you eliminate 8 or so members of the Shadenhall Sanctuary, while here, the player literally takes out around 15 of them. Perhaps it's something that might be visited later though. Obviously, the purification is a different subject altogether, but it feels like this little adventure should have set the Morrowind Dark Brotherhood back by a lot. Anyways, I eventually made my way back up to the Great Bazaar and approached the first High Ordinator that I laid eyes on. I had to bring his disposition up to around 40 before getting any answers. Once done so, he said that if I believed that I truly killed their leader, I should speak with someone named Fedris Hlaalu. Inquiring about Hlaalu, the High Ordinator told me that he's the chief steward of Almalexia and can be found in the temple reception area. From the Great Bazaar, I wandered over to a gate that led into the temple courtyard. The courtyard space was massive and contained an elaborately grand structure, seemingly the temple within its center. Similar to previous areas within Mournhold, it felt full of life and rather peaceful, like a place that I really wanted to be in. Ascending up the steps, I made my way over to the doors of the temple and entered on inside. Within, I located the chief steward, Fedris Hlaalu, and began speaking with him. He recognized me as Mournhold's newest arrival and addressed my issues with the Dark Brotherhood. He questions if my survival means that I have potential, or if the Dark Brotherhood just sent their worst assassins after me. Either way, he says that I can be of service to Our Lady. Inquiring about the guild a little further, Fedris says that it's been rumored that kings have used their services in the past, but quickly sweeps that thought under the rug. When asked about said services for Our Lady, he says that Lady Almalexia is always sending High Ordinators and hands out to take care of the petty business within the city. He then finishes with saying there are matters in which him and I should discuss. Now, continuing along with Fedris progresses the storyline further, but there's an alternate pathway that can be taken to get to this point too, which sheds a lot more light on the current state of affairs within Mournhold. I'd call it the scenic route in terms of Mournhold's main questline. Because I spoke with a High Ordinator about the Dark Brotherhood's contract on me, they sent me directly to Fedris. However, if I go and speak with the Royal Guard, they would send me off to speak with another. They direct me over to a man named Tienius de Lydian in the throne room of the royal palace. Seeking out the captain of the guard, it was a little tricky to find him at first, as I was still trying to gather my bearings around the palace. Eventually, I found myself in the throne room and face to face with Tienius himself. With that, thus ends the quest, Hunt the Dark Brotherhood. Approaching and speaking with Tienius, he introduces himself as King Helsith's captain of the guard and asks if this has to do with an official matter. Curious, I inquire about King Helsith, and he tells me that he's the current Duke of Mournhold and the ruler of Morrowind. Digging into the official matter, Tienius repeats himself with his ranking and influences with the king. I'm then prompted to ask for more information, say I'm not interested, or show him the evidence that King Helsith tried to have me killed. It wasn't something that I was able to piece together before this, but I suppose it all makes sense now. Dandris calling out for his liege, the contract signed H, the utmost urgency surrounding my assassination. I decide to present the contract to Tienius in order to see what will happen. Surprisingly, Tienius affirms that this was likely the doing of King Helsith. He insinuates that my Nerevarine status was likely the cause, as the king probably felt threatened. He then says that I have the option to prove myself in the eyes of the monarchy and asks if I'm interested in helping him out with a problem. As mentioned before, this part of the main quest is completely optional and can be skipped over by going straight to Fedris. However, I found it really useful in learning about the power struggles within Mournhold. I ask him to tell me more, and Tienius says there are rumors surrounding the previous King Lethin's death. Some are saying that he did not die a natural death, and I'm asked to speak with the citizens to hear their opinions on the matter. Before accepting to do the task, I ask him if Athen Lethin really did die of natural causes. This comment irritates Tienius, which you'll notice to be a common theme for the next little bit. I close off by telling him that I'm going to take care of it and exit the conversation. I began asking around right away. Some people responded by saying that he was an old man and that he wasn't going to live forever. Others responded by saying that old men die and long live to the new king. I moved around to a lot of different areas, speaking with a lot of different NPCs for the first time. I knew for a fact that a lot of them were one dialogue prompt away from offering me a quest to embark on, so I was trying to be very careful in what I asked them. Perhaps one of the more interesting responses I received was from the Dunmer of Mournhold. They said that there's a chance he died from old age, and that Dunmer lived for a long time, but they also know how to keep their mouths shut. This comment confused me because it sounded like there was more that they wanted to say but wouldn't or shouldn't. Continuing to roam around, a lot of NPCs began responding in an almost irritated manner. They swore their fealty to King Helsith and asked what more they could possibly say beyond that. In fact, it seemed like at this point, that was the main response that I was getting out of everybody. At one point, I checked in my journal to see if I had actually made any progress. My character was jotting down responses, but nothing indicated that I should return back to Tienius in the throne room. This is where the adventure took me to God's Reach. This section of the city was really neat. It was where most of the civilians lived, and there are a lot of interesting establishments beyond mere manors here. Finally, I had run into somebody with a different opinion on King Lethin's death. Some wished him a peaceful rest, but the Dunmer ultimately don't have kings, calling it imperial foolishness. Admittedly, it took me a very long time to realize that the civilians needed to have their dispositions raised in order to hear the juicy gossip. Plenty of failed attempts with other NPCs later, I went over to a High Ordinator and handed him a hefty sum of gold. At long last, he revealed journal entry worthy information. He called King Lethin old, but not that old. He suggests that someone sped up the dying process and that there's actually an article written in something called the Common Tongue about King Helsith, which details that he's poisoned hundreds of people prior to his rule in Mournhold. With this new information, I returned back to Tienius and told him of the rumor. He wonders if maybe Helsith did poison Lethin all along and wants to read this Common Tongue article for himself. He thanks me for my efforts and asks if I can help him find a temple informant. Tienius says there are rumors of discontent within the temple of Almalexia. He asks me to go over there and lightly interrogate some folks to see if this is true, and if instead, they would accept King Helsith as their ruler. I shoot back and ask if King Helsith is a supporter of the temple. Tienius responds in a rather rehearsed manner, saying that the king is a supporter of both the imperial cult and the temple. He cuts the conversation short and inquires again if this is something that I can do. I accept and go on my way. I wander over to the temple courtyard and find someone named Mayra Halas just outside of the temple itself. Speaking with her, I ask if there's discontent within the temple. She says that there definitely is, as there's dissatisfaction everywhere in the world. Moving along, I entered inside of the temple reception area and came across a woman named Granny Varys. Asking her about discontent, she responded similarly to Hlaalu, but ended up saying that their faith in Almalexia sustains them. I lucked out with the next NPC, as in the infirmary section of the temple, I met with a woman named Galsa Andrano. I asked her the same question, and she responded in quite the lengthy manner. She said that she grows weary of the Tribunal. For so long, they seem to have distanced themselves from the mortal kind, but as of late, Almalexia has begun to walk amongst the people again, which is cause for concern. I'm prompted to either ask about the temple and the king, continue to listen patiently, or bring up Mera Milo and the dissident priests. I choose the middle option, and Galsa continues onwards. Almalexia has apparently become a strict ruler, denouncing and threatening anyone who isn't a completely faithful servant. Galsa says that now, her beliefs in the temple scare her. I slickly slide in the question about the temple and the king, to which she shoots down immediately and says that this was a mistake to discuss such matters with strangers. Disheartened, I threw a good chunk of change her way and repeated the process over again. This time, when posing the question, Galsa answers honestly and says that she believes Helsith murdered Lethin. She called Lethin their true king, and that if Helsith truly tries to take over the people of Mournhold and attempts to be anything more than a figurehead, the temple and Almalexia will strike him down. Returning back to Tienius with the information, he takes these words as a warning that there's likely no truce to be had between the temple and the monarchy. King Helsith plans to be more than Lethin ever was. He thanks me for my efforts and asks if I can help out with possible disloyalty amongst the guards. For the succession of King Helsith, many of the royal guards were replaced. There were some, however, from King Lethin's reign that needed to stay on due to their experience. He wants me to pose as someone trying to enlist in the royal guards, and asks me to speak with those serving in order to scope out those who may be disloyal. I try asking him if there's anyone specific that he has in mind whom I should vet first, but he says that it's my judgment in which is being tested. I tell Tienius that I'll take care of it and begin my search. I start with the guards in the throne room. Drusus Gratus tells me that his family has long served King Helsith and Queen Barenziah. I have 3 prompts for him: to ask about Lethin, ask about Helsith, or to mention my House Hlaalu connections. All of his responses are brief, professional, and for the most part positive. The next guard I go to is Evo Othreloth. Evo says that they're new to the Royal Guard and haven't really formed much of an opinion on things yet. Evo also answers the questions in a confident and not very suspicious manner. The next guard I went to, however, was Evulin Arano. He seemed irritated with me asking about joining the Royal Guards. He said the old king was a fool but kind to the people. The new king, however, is ambitious, and because of that, needs experienced guards around like Evulin. I ask about King Lethin, and he gives me an honest take on the previous ruler. When I asked about King Helsith, though, Evulin stumbles on his words and poorly attempts to claim his fealty to the ruler. My character made note of that, and I told Tienius what had just happened. Tienius says Evulin isn't that smart to begin with, so it could have been an honest fumble, but asks me to follow up again. This time, I tell Evulin about my connection to House Hlaalu. Evulin gets excited and says that I need to share this information with someone named Aleri Aren, and that I shouldn't mention this at all to Tienius. From here, I follow the lead and seek out Aleri within the guard quarters. Asking about joining the Royal Guards, she says the same sort of rehearsed response I've heard before and stays fairly unopinionated. When I brought up my House Hlaalu connections and Evulin telling me to seek her out, she became very defensive and denied having any knowledge of why he might say such things. She calls it a misunderstanding and that she'll speak with Evulin privately later. Returning back to Tienius, he believes that the two of them are likely working together. He calls Evulin the weaker link of the duo and suggests that I snoop through his belongings to see if I can find any tangible evidence. Returning back to the guard's quarters, I lay eyes on Evulin's bed and personal chest. Secluding myself and about to cast an unlocking spell, I notice something on the ground beneath the bed and behind the trunk. It appeared to be a handwritten note detailing guard rotations and rosters. When the schedules of Milvela Drelin, Evulin Arano, and Aleri Aren are all lined up to be in the throne room together, it was underlined and made to seem rather important. Bringing the letter back to Tienius, he confirms that this is Evulin's handwriting and makes note to change the rotations and schedules of the 3 guards. He He vows to keep a close eye on them and thanks me for my efforts. He then asks for my help in uncovering a conspiracy against King Helseth. The Hlaalu supporters of King Lethin are less accepting of his so-called natural death. They certainly aren't supportive of Helseth's succession, and Tienye suggests that they'd likely want to see another member of House Hlaalu put on the throne. He asks me to search Lethin Manor for any evidence of a conspiracy against the current king. I inquire about any defenses the house may have, and Tienye comes up short with me, saying that if I truly needed such information, I'm likely not the person for the job. I tell him I'll take care of it and exit the conversation. I figured the manor would be in God's reach, so I went straight there and began to case the houses. Eventually, I landed on Lethin Manor and entered inside. In the foyer section of the home, a guard named Anrail stood posted, keeping an eye on things. I wandered into an adjacent room and closed the door behind me. It appeared to be a study of some sorts, and I began reading books as well as looking through every sort of container. There was nothing here, so I ascended to the second level next. This area had more rooms and another NPC roaming around, keeping watch. I broke into as many chests as possible, again, not finding anything of use for this mission. I then entered into a room containing the widowed Ravani Lethin. She was riddled with anger and sadness, cursing the Imperials for not taking any action against Helseth and his trusted advisors. She too believes in what she read with the common tongue, connecting the dots of Helseth's affinity for poison and Lethin's untimely death. Just behind Ravani, on a dresser, was a handwritten letter, addressed outside, "To my honorable cousin, Forvin Barano, be this delivered in haste. Forvin, I cannot agree. I am a merchant and have no skill at arms. You are a noble and in your prime were proven on practice and tournament grounds. Though, in truth, you have never fought a duel and have few gifts as a liar. No one can doubt Hlaalu the Bloody's aptitude and enthusiasm for mayhem, but he is not a subtle man, more suited for a brawl or battlefield than an assassin's role, and we cannot trust the Dark Brotherhood. Helseth owns them. They promise discretion, but their promises are worthless. I'm afraid we must approach the Morag Tom. I agree with you, they'll probably refuse, but at least they can be trusted to be discreet. If, in the end, we're forced to choose among ourselves, I fear it must be you, and we'll have to rack our brains for some plausible pretext that you'll get into Helseth's presence. I am disappointed though, not surprised, at lack of public outcry for Athen's murder. The popular sentiment seems to be to avoid personal risk and accept Helseth. It's short-sighted but understandable. I have noted, however, that the writer of the Common Tongue is sympathetic to our cause, clever and eloquent. He may be able to sway opinion. We should try to identify this fellow and try to bring him our counsels. Your faithful servant, Bedel Allen. I tried everything in my power to not be seen while taking this note, but nothing really worked. So I was forced to steal it in front of Ravani, making hopefully a temporary enemy out of King Lethin's royal subjects and family. I brought the letter back to Tienye, and he calls out the men mentioned within it. He draws up execution writs and asks me to take care of the rest in the name of the king. Accepting, I ask for specifics on each traitor and then set off. The first one is Forvin Barano. Tienye calls him out as a faithful temple goer, and wouldn't you believe it, I found Forvin in the temple courtyard and accosted him. I brought up the evidence of conspiracy and he outright denied the claims. I had the options of denouncing and executing him or warning him and telling him to escape. I was looking for a little bit of a fight, so I chose the former. His facade quickly unraveled, calling me a lackey to the tyrant of Helseth, and that he'd show me how a real Hlaalu noble acts. A few prods and pokes with my spear, and Forvin was defeated. The next person of interest was Hlaalu the Bloody. Tienye said that he was likely too cheap to pay for lodging, so I'd probably find him in the sewers. Going over to God's Reach and submerging into the residential sewers, I came across a brand new yet familiar enemy type. Some goblins aggroed onto me and a fight broke out. They're handled a little bit different in this game than they are in Oblivion. If they land a hit, they deal incredible amounts of damage, and the ones with shields are great at blocking attacks. The silver lining to the goblins, at least for my case, is that with the Daedric Spear, they don't take very many hits to kill. Eventually, I found myself within the west sewers and meandering my way through a cave. Pretty soon, I came across a Nord clad in steel armor.
Someone should teach you some manners.
Approaching, it turned out to be Hlaalu. I accused him of the conspiracy against King Helseth, and he didn't deny it. He only asked what I was going to do about it. I chose to denounce and execute him, causing another fight to break out. This one was certainly a little more tough. He fought with an enchanted warhammer, and honestly, the fight came down to the wire. Due to my spear's reach, I was lucky enough to be the one dealing the final blow, and all that was left was to find the third person. Beidel Allen, the final one involved in the conspiracy, was a difficult man to locate. Tienius had no clue where he could have been, so I took matters into my own hands and asked a high ordinator. He called Beidel a bookworm and said to try a bookstore. I remembered seeing one in the Great Bazaar and went straight there. Right off the bat, I didn't see anybody inside besides the merchant. Funnily enough, when asked about Beidel, Sinasso the vendor told me to try a bookstore. This was when I noticed though that there was an upstairs section to the establishment. Ascending the stairs, I laid eyes on and finally found Beidel. Confronting him with the conspiracy, he became distressed and asked to have mercy. I denounced him and got ready for the execution. With a few casts of magic, Beidel was dead and I could return back to Tienius to tell him of my deeds. I brought up the evidence of conspiracy and he thanked me for executing all 3 men, rewarding me with 3,000 gold. Tienius then asks me for my help in finding the anonymous writer of the common tongue. He'd like me to find this person and persuade them into stop writing quote-unquote lies about King Helseth. Every time the guard makes an inquiry, the people assure them that they have no idea who could be behind the articles. I press Tienius's buttons by calling out Helseth as a poisoner and that they aren't really lies. I quickly get worried though that I've gone too far with Tienius, as he becomes aggressive and very pointed with his words. The topic quickly closes out and luckily I'm able to restart it and progress the conversation. He suggests that I try those who place gold above honor first, and makes an ironic comment about wanting to keep free speech alive whilst I enforce the writer to go quiet. Taking the job, I exit the royal palace and immediately head straight for a sellsword whom I found in the courtyard. He says that he doesn't know the identity of the writer, calling it one of life's little mysteries. Even after throwing gold his way, his response doesn't change, so I move on. A lot of other NPCs tell me things like they outright can't help me, they don't know who he is as that's the point of the anonymity, I shouldn't be looking for someone who doesn't want to be found, etc. Finally, I try my luck again with a high ordinator and they divulge a much needed clue. They try looking at the pawnbrokers as they deal in shady goods and might sell stuff such as scrolls and books as well. I pay a visit to the pawnbroker within the Great Bazaar, 10 Tongues Weirhat, and grease him up with some septims. He tells me that the person I'm looking for is named Trels Varus. The catch, however, is that there's no one in Mournhold who knows of him or his location. Trels is very well hidden, but 10 Tongues tells me that I should look around in the Craftsman Hall, as that's where the tip originated from. Making my way over to God's Reach and entering inside of it, I ask around amongst the craftsmen, but none of them can tell me anything about Trels Varus. Scoping out the building and searching for any further leads, I came across a rather strange locked door titled Keep Out. Unlocking it by a spell, the other side contained a trap door leading down into some sort of secret office. Descending the ladder, I came face to face with 4 discreet and nervous individuals. This room contained papers, inkwells, and most importantly, articles of the common tongue. Speaking with some of the Murren here, they all told me that I should talk directly with Varus. Locating the elusive Trels Varus, he asked me what I was doing here and said that I must answer clearly, otherwise they may be forced to kill me. I have 4 prompts to work with. Tell him to stop printing lies about the king, tell him I'm a burglar looking for treasure, tell him I'm in search of the Eye of Argonia, or that I'll keep this place a secret and I wish to leave with no trouble. I decide to be honest and double down by demanding that he stop writing fibs about the king. He says that he hasn't written any lies about Helseth, and that the common tongue is dedicated to spreading the truth. He asks how I plan to make him stop. I can either threaten to kill him, gift him 1,000 gold, or pledge to donate 3,000 gold to the Widows and Orphans Fund. Choosing the last option, he admits that free speech is what holds the common tongue together, but understands how useful the donation would be for those in need. He agrees to my terms and says he will no longer write about King Helseth, and that now the team has to relocate to a new secret hideout. The 3,000 gold is removed from my inventory, and I run along back to Tienius to inform him of my work. He summarizes my story back to me and asks to confirm if I gave up the 3,000 gold. I'm prompted to either tell him yes, and that I'd like to be reimbursed for it, or that it was a necessary sacrifice for the king. I mention that I expect my expenses to be covered, and Tienius thanks me for my efforts, gifting me a total of 8,000 gold. He then asks one final favor of me, to go and speak with Lady Barenziah. Exiting the conversation, I wandered through the royal palace in search of the queen's quarters. Wandering into the Imperial Cult Services section, I located Barenziah's chambers and entered inside. Coming face to face with the lady herself, she says that she's been wanting to speak with me, and knows of the duties I've been carrying out for the king. She follows up by saying that there are other matters I should look into as well. Inquiring about them, Barenziah summarizes the state of affairs within Mournhold. The monarchy led by Helsith and the tribunal directed by Almalexia are slowly growing more tense with one another. She directs me over to the previously mentioned Fedris Hlur within the temple in hopes that I may learn more about him and the tribunal. I asked her who I can trust in these deceptive and dangerous times. She says that she can always answer my questions and that a friend of hers, Platinius Marrow, is very knowledgeable and forthcoming with many subjects. Before parting, she tells me that there's more to Fedris than one might think. There are rumors that he used to be an assassin, and his current position within the temple leaves him with lots of power. Exiting the conversation, thus ends the Royal Palace optional quests. As mentioned before, these set of quests are rather short and, in the grand scheme of things, might seem rather irrelevant to the final plot, but they're actually incredibly helpful for acquainting the player with the city of Mournhold, the political powers at play, and its recent history and dynamics. Resuming my previous conversation with Fedris in the temple reception area, I asked him about Almalexia. He confirms my suspicion that Almalexia is actually present within the High Temple, similar to how Vivec oversaw and resided within the Temple of Vivec. Inquiring about the matters that were up for discussion, Fedris suggests that I could have already met with King Helsith. He calls him a foul man unworthy to sit on the throne. He shares his concerns with me in regards to some new recruits in which Helsith has been training. Going further with this topic, Fedris reveals that King Helsith is in fact raising an army of goblins. He calls this act unnecessary as Mournhold is well guarded by High Ordinators on the outside and by Lady Almalexia on the inside. Asking about the goblin army, Fedris calls them nasty vicious creatures, and that it makes sense why someone such as Helsith would want them as soldiers. I'm to ask around amongst the locals as to where the training grounds for the creatures could be. Once I've found it, I'm tasked with killing all of the war chiefs present, as well as their alleged high elf trainers. Fedris warns me that the goblins can vary in size and strength, and that they're often accompanied by menacing creatures called durzogs. Exiting the conversation, I left the temple reception area and spoke with the first NPC I saw.
It's another perfect day in Mournhold,
Merahalis. Inquiring about goblins, she said that there were rumors of creatures beneath the sewers of Godsreach, however, isn't sure if they're goblins or not. I suppose I can confirm this theory as I literally witnessed and fought against them myself. I restocked on supplies and repaired my weapons and armor before venturing out. Descending back down into the sewers, the bodies of the goblins I had slain prior were still splayed out on the floor. From the residential area, I made my way into the west sewers and began journeying through unmarked territory. This time, traveling the opposite way from where I found Hlaagar, I immediately ran into a durzog and different variations of goblin enemies. These ones were more brutish, but didn't hit as hard as their weapon-wielding kin. The durzog, on the other hand, was a fairly formidable foe. It was really quick, had beefy health, and the ability to take decent chunks out of me. The boots of blinding speed really came in handy here. By activating my sprint, I sacrificed fatigue for being able to thrust really quickly and then leaping out just as fast. The nice part about killing the goblin handlers was that each one held a bargain health potion in their inventory. These potions really came in clutch as the journey progressed. Continuing through the west sewers, I battled against more goblins before finally arriving outside of a new zone called the battlefield. Within the battlefield, I came across another variation of goblin. This one was built like the handlers, but was able to cast spells. Dealing with it and venturing further into the cave system, I came across an enormous open area. One of the doors there led to a zone called City Gate. City Gate was a narrow passageway that served as a connection area to various different points. One of these points was titled the Residential Ruins, and was secured by a level 100 lock. Using a spell to open it, the Residential Ruins led back to a sewer-type area where the fighting resumed. The nice part about these ruins though is that they served as a connecting point between the two zones in which I needed to get to. In fact, the back of the ruins held the stronghold in which the two Altmer trainers were residing in. Entering inside of the Terran Hall East building, I immediately ran into a wall of goblins and durzogs. I found this part to be particularly tricky, as my main way of handling these fights is by maneuvering around a big area. Without anywhere to back up to or anywhere to move at all, the goblin forces pinned me down and killed me more than a few times. On one run, I got lucky in that upon entering inside of the building, there was only one goblin waiting for me on the other side. I quickly killed it and attracted the attention of another. Before the cycle could repeat itself, I moved the fight into a different area of the building, crossing my fingers that we wouldn't be happened across. Thankfully, the coast was clear and I was able to progress further into the stronghold. After taking care of a few loose stragglers, I finally laid eyes on the Altmer trainers. Just barely turning the corner and gaining line of sight with one of them, he aggroed onto me and rushed in. I cast 2 fire spells and cut him down with my spear before the fight could turn against me. Healing up, I repeated the process with the other trainer, and upon his death, received a journal update. Now, all that was left was to locate and kill the goblin warchiefs. In order to get to them, I backtracked through the residential ruins and came across a previous crossroads of sorts. This time, taking the pathway that leads upwards on the local map, I ended up outside of an area called the Tears of Amun-She. Upon going inside, I immediately attracted the attention of a hulking, angry, magicka-casting goblin. I figured due to its aesthetic and size, it had to be a warchief. I got in close and utilized stagger and stun with my spear in order to get some repeated hits in. It had a lot of health, and if I let it get the jump on me, it was able to beat me down pretty good. Shortly into the battle, I found a way to take advantage of the situation. Just above the tunnel I had walked out from was a small ledge. Because of where it was located and the warchief's proximity to me, it was unable to reach me or let off an attack. I traced its movements for a bit before letting off some fire spells. Finally, with a third or so cast, Warchief Kurog was killed, and I only needed to locate one more. It didn't take me very long to do so though. Wandering through the tunnels, I happened across the second warchief and lured it back into the tight spaces. I was relieved to see it get caught on a corner whilst going through its running animations. This allowed me to cheese the fight and ultimately prod it to death with my spear without taking any damage. Once Warchief Durgok was defeated, I received a journal update that I could return back to Fedris. Durgok had a key on him which allowed me to access his chest. He had a hefty sum of gold, as well as an enchanted item called a goblin buckler. Finally, it was time to leave the sewers, although I knew there was going to be trouble on the way out. I had rested so many times whilst down here that I knew for a fact all of the goblins I had previously killed respawned back in. So I ultimately decided to use the boots of blinding speed to the best of their ability, by dodging and weaving my way out of the sewers. I honestly had a lot of fun doing this. It was kind of thrilling to know that if I made any mistake at all, I would be instantly beaten down and killed. Soon, I found the ladder leading back up to God's Reach and took a breath of relief. Returning back to Fedris, he asked me what the status on the goblin army was. He was surprised to hear that I had taken care of all 4 targets and admitted to underestimating my abilities. He swears not to do it again and gives me 15,000 gold for my efforts, thus ending the quest, the Goblin Army. Resuming the conversation with Fedris, he asks if I wish to be of further service to Our Lady. Asking about it, he says that he personally doesn't have any new tasks at this time, but mentions the Lord Arcanon, Gavis Drin, might. Entering into the office section of the temple, I located Drin and began speaking with him. He said that the task laid out for me was of the utmost importance, and that if I were to fail, it would be very displeasing to the Lady Almalexia. Inquiring about the job, Drin says that there's a large sewer system beneath the temple. Within the ruins of Old Mournhold, there lies a corrupted shrine. Asking about the shrine, he calls it the Shrine of the Dead. It was once a place of great power, allowing the faithful to speak with their ancestors. As of late though, it's been neglected and a source of evil has gathered there. Drin says that the shrine must be cleansed, but not by me. I'm to escort Urvel Dolny, one of Almalexia's chosen, down into the depths. The shrine is apparently guarded by a group called the Profane. They're powerful liches who harness the power of the shrine. Drin stresses that Urvel is the only one who can do this cleansing, and all is failed if he dies. Exiting the conversation, Urvel is conveniently standing right behind us. Talking with him, he seems rather nervous and apprehensive with what lies ahead. He outright says that the shrine frightens him, but understands that he has a duty to Almalexia. I tell him to follow me, and together we embark on the journey. Descending to the temple's basement, I located the trap door leading further down into the sewers below. Right off the bat, I encountered some bone lords and rats. This had me relieved on the fronts that the enemies we'd be fighting were mostly undead and that Urvel can actually defend himself. I wasn't going to let him take on too many enemies at once, but it was nice to know that he seemed like a capable fighter. Something I began to catch on to with the Tribunal DLC was that more than likely, most of the action was going to take place within Mournhold's sewers. This made sense as there wasn't actually a way to leave or explore the greater areas beyond the city's limits. It seemed as though for now, the peaceful interactions would happen topside and the violent discoveries would occur below. Together, Urvel and I continued along the path until we arrived at a new zone called the Temple Sewers East. Just on the other side of its doors, a random powerful hostile dark elf lay dormant, waiting for us to appear. He cast a spell which flew past me and I pressed in for the attack. His ability to heal mid-battle was impeccable, as any damage dealt with my spear seemed to be recovered quickly. At one point, I turned around to check on Urvel, only to see that he's long been dead. The initial spell that the Dark Elf cast must have been intended for him, and likely killed him at the start of the battle. I reverted my save and tried the fight again, this time telling Urvel to wait on the other side of the gate. I charged in with my spear, only to have him quickly regenerate his health back mid-fight. I then equipped and cast my most powerful destruction spell, which, thankfully, killed him instantly. Urvel and I continued along through the sewers, fighting more petty and weak undead. The whole time, I was trying my best to take aggro and lead so Urvel would stay alive. Things went smoothly, and the two of us entered inside of a zone called the Temple Gardens. The gardens held more lower tiers of undead enemies, and before we knew it, Urvel and I were standing at a door leading to the temple shrine. I decided that I didn't want him in there while I was taking on the profane acolytes. So I told him to wait out here and entered in alone. I encountered one right away within the shrine area. It looked sort of similar in appearance to a bone lord, but took on more of a humanoid form. I was able to get up in its face and hit it repeatedly with my spear. It was defeated, and I brought Urvel in here to have him close by, but not too close. Through an old metal door leading into the next room, I encountered two more profane acolytes, and this time they showed me just how powerful they were. One of them summoned a greater bone walker, and their lightning attacks kept landing, draining my health rapidly. I popped some health potions and decided to be cautious with the preceding battle. I used the power of my boots to stay agile, dodging as many lightning casts as I could and getting in quickly to hit them with my spear. Eventually, the two of them were defeated, and just a little further, the final two acolytes were wandering about. They aggroed onto me, and unfortunately, I wasn't as careful with dueling them. My health drained to a pretty low amount, and I popped some more health potions to counteract it. This next play I was pretty proud of though. I was able to get right up close with my spear and dodge every single one of their lightning casts. It went so well that before I knew it, both of them were defeated and the shrine was now clear. I returned back to Urvel and escorted him up to the altar in the center of the room. Getting within its proximity, Urvel announced he was going to start the cleansing. He walked up to the altar, some light was produced, and I received a journal update. Together, the two of us retraced our steps back out into the sewers, and luckily, I didn't do a whole lot of resting here, so none of the slain enemies respawned back in. We ascended back up into the basement of the temple and returned to the Arcanon's office. Speaking with Gavis, he asked if I had taken care of the shrine yet. I let him know that Urvel and I were successful, and Drin tells me that the goddess is pleased with my efforts. As a reward, he hands me the blessed spear, which is actually perfect for my needs. The Blessed Spear is an enchanted ebony spear and has the constant effect of shield for 30 points and fortify spear skill for 10 points. With that, thus ends the quest, the Shrine of the Dead.